Jungkook hid a box for years. When Jimin finally opens it, every unsaid memory, regret, and love they buried begins to surface. "Don't open that." Jimin froze with the small wooden box halfway out of Jungkook's closet, dust drifting through the thin line of evening light that cut across the room. His fingers tightened around the lid. The voice behind him was low, strained, almost unfamiliar. Slowly, Jimin turned. Jungkook stood in the doorway like someone who had just run a mile without moving an inch. His dark hair was damp at the temples, his chest rising and falling under a loose black shirt. His eyes, usually bright, quick, playful, were fixed on the box with a kind of quiet panic. For a moment, neither of them moved. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of rain against the balcony window. Jimin's heartbeat thudded louder than both. "I was just cleaning," Jimin said carefully. It sounded like a lie, even to him. Jungkook stepped inside the room, one step, then another, slow, deliberate, like approaching something fragile. "You weren't supposed to find it." Jimin looked down at the box again. It was small, barely bigger than two hands placed side by side, dark walnut wood, the edges worn smooth as if someone had held it often. There was no lock, no label. "Just time." "How long has this been here?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't answer. That, more than anything, made something twist inside Jimin's chest. They had lived together for almost 2 years. Shared groceries, late-night ramen, laundry arguments, and quiet mornings when neither of them spoke, but both lingered over coffee like the silence itself was something warm. And yet this box felt older than the apartment, older than their friendship. "Jungkook," Jimin said softly, "what is it?" Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck, a habit Jimin knew too well. It was the gesture he used whenever words were sitting somewhere behind his ribs, refusing to come out. "It's nothing," he said. Jimin raised an eyebrow. "That's the worst lie you've ever told." A faint smile flickered across Jungkook's face, but it vanished almost immediately. "Please," Jungkook said quietly, "just put it back." Jimin studied him. There was fear there, not loud fear, not the kind that shouts. The quiet kind. The kind that remembers. Rain tapped harder against the window. Jimin exhaled slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed, the box resting in his lap. "I've known you for 8 years," he said. Jungkook leaned against the wall, arms folded tight. "7," Jungkook muttered automatically. Jimin smiled faintly. "You corrected me even now. It was 7 years and 3 months. See." Silence stretched between them. Jimin ran his thumb along the edge of the lid. The wood was warm despite the dust. "You keep secrets badly," Jimin said. "That's not true." "It is. When you lie, you blink slower." Jungkook blinked. "Once. Slow." Jimin looked up. "Like that." Jungkook huffed quietly, but the tension in his shoulders didn't disappear. Jimin felt something deeper than curiosity now, something heavier, a pull he couldn't quite name. "Why didn't you want me to see this?" Jungkook's voice was softer when he answered. "Because it's stupid." "Then why hide it?" Jungkook didn't reply. The rain thickened outside, a soft roar filling the spaces between words. Jimin lifted the lid. Jungkook inhaled sharply. Inside the box was not what Jimin expected. No letters. No money. No obvious secret. Just pieces of a life. At the very top lay a crumpled movie ticket, the ink faded but still readable. Jimin picked it up. The date made him pause. 7 years ago. His eyes flicked to Jungkook. "That was the night we snuck out of practice," Jimin said slowly. Jungkook looked away. "You said you lost that ticket." "I did," Jungkook murmured. Jimin reached deeper into the box. There was a Polaroid photo. The picture showed two boys sitting on the roof of a dorm building, city lights scattered behind them like stars that had fallen to earth. Jimin recognized the moment instantly. He was laughing in the photo, head thrown back, while Jungkook looked sideways at him instead of at the camera. Jimin remembered that night. He had forgotten someone took a photo. "You kept this?" Jungkook shrugged. "Another item. A thin silver bracelet." Jimin's breath caught. "That broke," he said. "You dropped it after the concert," Jungkook replied quietly. "You didn't notice." Jimin turned it in his palm. The metal was scratched but polished clean. "How did you?" "I picked it up." "Why didn't you give it back?" Jungkook hesitated. "I liked having something you forgot." Jimin stared at him. The words hung in the room, strange and delicate. He reached again into the box. There were dozens of things. A napkin with a doodle of a bunny wearing a crown. A subway card that expired years ago. A tiny folded piece of paper. Jimin unfolded it carefully. Inside was a simple sentence written in messy handwriting. "You said today was the worst day of your life, but you still bought me tteokbokki. I think that means you care more than you admit." Jimin's throat tightened. "That was after the fight with the manager," he whispered. "You were crying," Jungkook said. "You noticed." "I always notice." Jimin looked up slowly. Jungkook's expression was calm now, almost resigned. Like a secret had already escaped, and there was no point chasing it anymore. "How long have you been keeping these?" Jimin asked. Jungkook's answer came without hesitation. "Since the first day." Jimin blinked. "The first day we met." Jungkook nodded. "I didn't think you'd remember me," he said. Jimin laughed softly, disbelief mixing with something warmer. "You were the loudest trainee in the room. Of course, I remembered you." Jungkook shook his head. "You remember the loud parts, I remember the quiet ones." Jimin lowered his gaze back to the box. Every object inside it was ordinary. But together they felt like a map. A timeline of moments Jimin had lived through without realizing someone else was holding onto them. Protecting them. Saving them. "Why keep all this?" Jimin asked. Jungkook walked closer and sat on the floor in front of him. The distance between them shrank until their knees almost touched. "For the same reason people keep photographs," Jungkook said. "These aren't just photographs." "I know." Jimin watched his face carefully. Jungkook wasn't embarrassed anymore. He looked tired. Relieved, maybe. "I thought if I said the things I wanted to say," Jungkook continued slowly, "it might ruin what we already had." Jimin's chest tightened. "So you hid them in a box?" "Yeah." "That's your solution." Jungkook smiled faintly. "It worked for 7 years." Jimin let out a breath that sounded half like laughter, half like something else. He looked once more at the collection of memories. A life preserved in fragments. "You kept every moment," Jimin said quietly. Jungkook met his eyes. "Not every moment. Most of them. The important ones." Jimin closed the lid gently. The rain outside softened into a steady whisper. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Jimin rested his hand on top of the box and looked at Jungkook with a softness that hadn't been there before. "You should have told me," he said. Jungkook's voice was almost a whisper. "I was afraid." "Of what?" Jungkook thought for a moment before answering. "Of losing the memories if the future changed." Jimin studied him. Then he nudged the box slightly toward Jungkook. "You don't have to hide them anymore." Jungkook's brow furrowed. Why? Jimin smiled gently. Because I remember them too. Jimin thought the conversation would end after that night. It didn't. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed in a pale grey light that crept through the apartment windows. Jimin had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the objects inside the box again, the bracelet, the ticket, the note written in Jungkook's messy handwriting. Memories he had lived. Memories Jungkook had protected. And now those memories had weight. When Jimin walked into the kitchen the next morning, Jungkook was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee that had gone cold. His hair was still damp from a shower, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "You look terrible," Jimin said. Jungkook snorted quietly, "Good morning to you too." Jimin grabbed another mug and poured coffee. Neither of them mentioned the box. The silence was thick, awkward, like two people standing on the edge of a conversation neither knew how to begin. Finally, Jimin said, "You stayed up all night, didn't you?" Jungkook shrugged. "You opened it. That's not an answer. I thought you'd hate it." Jimin blinked, "Hate it?" Jungkook rubbed his face, frustration flickering across his features. "Yeah, hate it, think it's creepy, think I'm weird for keeping all that." Jimin set his mug down. "Jungkook, what? You literally kept a napkin I doodled on 7 years ago." "I know. That is weird." Jungkook groaned and dragged a hand through his hair. "See." But Jimin continued calmly, "It's also kind of insane in a different way." Jungkook stared at him cautiously. "What kind of insane?" "The kind where someone remembers every small thing you thought nobody noticed." Jungkook looked away again. "That's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing either." Silence returned. Jimin watched him carefully. Jungkook had always been expressive when he laughed, angry when he argued, playful when he teased. But when he was vulnerable, he folded inward like a storm pulling back before thunder. "You said you were afraid," Jimin said softly. Jungkook nodded. "Afraid of losing the memories if the future changed." "Yeah." Jimin leaned against the opposite counter. "Well," he said slowly, "the future already changed last night." Jungkook's gaze snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't unknow this now." Jungkook swallowed. "That's exactly what I was worried about." "Why?" "Because now everything's different." Jimin tilted his head. "Is it?" "Yes." "How?" Jungkook opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jimin waited. After a long moment, Jungkook muttered, "Because now you know I cared more than I was supposed to." The words landed like a spark in dry air. Jimin's chest tightened. "Supposed to," he repeated. Jungkook laughed bitterly. "Yeah, friends aren't supposed to memorize the way someone laughs, or keep broken bracelets, or write down the worst day of their life, because someone else bought them spicy rice cakes." Jimin folded his arms. "That sounds oddly specific." "Because it happened. I remember." "Good." Jimin exhaled slowly. "Jungkook." "Yeah. You're acting like this is a crime. It kind of feels like one." "Why?" Jungkook looked at him then, really looked, eyes sharp and searching. "Because if you didn't feel the same way, then everything in that box becomes embarrassing." Jimin froze. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The morning light seemed brighter, harsher. "You mean?" Jimin stopped. "Jungkook didn't rescue him." "Say it," Jungkook said quietly. "You're saying those memories." Jungkook nodded once. "Weren't just memories." A long silence stretched between them. Jimin's pulse pounded in his ears. "You're unbelievable," Jimin finally said. Jungkook stiffened. That's not an insult. Could have fooled me. You've been carrying this for 7 years. 8. 8 years. Jungkook shrugged again, though the gesture looked tense now. I got used to it. Used to being in love with someone who had no idea. The words slipped out before Jimin could stop them. The air went completely still. Jungkook didn't blink. Didn't move. Then he laughed. But it wasn't happy. Well, he said quietly, you figured it out faster than I expected. Jimin's stomach dropped. You're not even denying it. What's the point? You could have said something. When? I don't know, anytime in the last 8 years. Jungkook's voice sharpened. Right during practice, on tour, in the middle of all the chaos where one wrong step could destroy everything. Jimin opened his mouth, then hesitated. Jungkook continued, his voice rougher now. You had people watching you every second. Cameras, managers, fans. You barely had space to breathe, Jimin. And that stopped you from talking to me. It stopped me from risking you. Jimin frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if you think about it. Jimin stepped closer. No, explain it. Jungkook looked tired again. Because if I told you and you didn't feel the same, things would get awkward. And if you did feel the same, Jungkook hesitated. That would be worse. Jimin's eyebrows shot up. Worse? You know what I mean. Actually, I don't. Jungkook let out a frustrated breath. It would mean hiding something real while the entire world watched us like characters in a show. Jimin stared at him. You decided all that for me. I decided it for both of us. That's ridiculous. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You think so? Yes. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, packing across the kitchen. You kept a secret box for 8 years, but couldn't have one honest conversation with me. Jungkook stood up abruptly. It wasn't that simple. It never is. Their voices were louder now, emotions cracking through years of careful silence. Jimin turned toward him again. Do you know what bothers me the most? Jungkook crossed his arms defensively. What? You didn't trust me. Jungkook's eyes flashed. That's not true. It is. You assumed I'd reject you or panic or ruin everything. I assumed protecting what we had was safer. Safer for who? For you. Jimin scoffed. You don't get to decide that. Jungkook's voice dropped. I already did. The words hung there, heavy and final. For a moment, Jimin didn't know what to say. Anger burned in his chest, tangled with something else, something warmer and more confusing. Fine, Jimin said finally. Fine. Yeah. Jungkook frowned. What does that mean? It means you hid your feelings in a box. And now the box is open. Jungkook's shoulders tensed. That doesn't change anything. Jimin stepped closer again. It brought them dangerously close, close enough that Jungkook's breath brushed against his cheek. Are you sure about that? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook didn't answer. Jimin's voice softened. You really thought I'd hate you for loving me? Jungkook looked away. I didn't know. Jimin sighed. You idiot. That's comforting. I mean it affectionately. Sure you do. Jimin studied his face. For the first time since last night, the tension inside him shifted into something else. Curiosity. Hope. Maybe even fear. Jungkook, he said carefully. What? Why that box? Jungkook blinked. What do you mean? Why not delete the feelings, ignore them, move on? Jungkook thought about it. Then he said quietly, because every time I tried, you did something that made it worse. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Like what? You'd smile at me for no reason. That's normal. You'd remember my favorite ramen brand. Still normal. You'd stay up with me when I couldn't sleep. Jimin opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. Jungkook continued. And every time I thought maybe I could let it go, you'd remind me why I couldn't. Jimin's chest tightened again. That's not fair, he murmured. Jungkook shrugged. Feelings rarely are. Silence returned once more. Then Jimin asked the question he hadn't dared ask yet. So what happens now? Jungkook's answer came slowly. Now you forget about it. Jimin blinked. What? You close the box. We pretend this conversation never happened. Jimin stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You can't be serious. I am. That's your solution. It worked for 8 years. Jimin laughed incredulously. No, it didn't. I literally opened the box. Jungkook rubbed his temple. Jimin. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not pretending. Jungkook looked wary. Then what are you doing? Jimin held his gaze. I'm deciding. Deciding what? Jimin took a slow breath. Whether the box had only contained Jungkook's memories. Or theirs. Jungkook frowned slightly. Deciding what? He repeated. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped past Jungkook, heading toward the bedroom where the small wooden box still rested on the bed. Jungkook followed. Jimin, don't. Jimin opened the box again. Jungkook stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? Jimin lifted the Polaroid photo once more. The rooftop. The laughter. The moment frozen forever. You said you kept the important memories, Jimin said softly. Yeah. Jimin looked back at him. But you missed one. Jungkook frowned. What? Jimin placed the photo back into the box and closed the lid. You never kept the moment when I realized you were the most important person in my life. Jungkook went completely still. The room seemed to hold its breath. And for the first time in 8 years, Jungkook looked like he had no idea what to say. For a moment, Jungkook thought he had misheard. The words hung in the air like something fragile that might shatter if either of them moved too quickly. You never kept the moment when I realized you were the most important person in my life. Jungkook stared at Jimin. What did you just say? Jimin didn't look embarrassed. That was what unsettled Jungkook the most. Instead, he leaned against the edge of the bed, arms folded loosely, as if he had simply stated a fact. I said you missed a memory. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No, that's not what you meant. Jimin tilted his head slightly. What do you think I meant? I think, Jungkook said carefully, you're saying something you haven't thought through. Jimin let out a soft laugh. You think I'm confused. I think you're emotional. I am emotional. That's exactly the problem. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Why does it have to be a problem? Because, Jungkook said, his voice tightening, you just found out about my feelings 12 hours ago. So that's not enough time to suddenly discover your own. Jimin pushed himself upright. You don't get to tell me what I feel. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm not telling you what you feel, I'm telling you what this looks like. And what does it look like? It looks like you're trying to make me feel better. Jimin blinked. What? You feel guilty, Jungkook continued. You saw the box. You realized how long I've been carrying this, and now you think you have to respond somehow. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. That's your conclusion. It's the logical one. Jimin let out a short, incredulous laugh. God, Jungkook. What? You've spent 8 years analyzing every tiny thing I do, and somehow you're still this clueless. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Clueless about what? Jimin stepped closer. About me. Jungkook scoffed. Right, I'm the one who doesn't understand you. Yes. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Jimin folded his arms again, studying him with a strange mixture of affection and annoyance. You know my favorite ramen brand, Jimin said. Yeah. You know I hate sleeping with the lights completely off. Correct. You know I pretend to like pineapple pizza when our friends order it. You don't pretend very well. Exactly. Jimin leaned slightly forward. You know all those things. Jungkook frowned and you still think I'd lie about something like this? Jungkook didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that Jimin's expression softened. You really believe that? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook hesitated. I believe you're reacting to the moment. And if I'm not? Jungkook's voice dropped. Then you're about to ruin everything. Jimin blinked. Ruin everything. Yes. How? Jungkook laughed bitterly. Because if you say things like that and then realize later you didn't mean them. His voice faded. The rest didn't need to be said. Jimin watched him carefully. For the first time, he saw the real reason behind Jungkook's resistance. Fear. Not the quiet fear from last night. This one was raw. You think I'll change my mind, Jimin said softly. Jungkook looked away. You will. How are you so sure? Because you've never had to think about it before. Jimin walked to the window. The city outside was waking up slowly, cars sliding through wet streets, people moving under umbrellas, the faint noise of morning life rising into the apartment. He spoke without turning around. You want to know when I realized? Jungkook leaned against the doorframe. Realized what? That you were the most important person in my life. Jungkook swallowed. You don't have to answer that. But I want to. Jungkook's voice was tense. Why? Because you deserve the truth. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Jimin ignored the comment. It was 4 years ago. Jungkook opened his eyes again. 4 years. Yeah. That doesn't make sense. Why not? You would have said something. Jimin finally turned around. Would I? Yes. You're the one who kept a box for 8 years without saying anything. That's different. How? Because I knew what I felt. Jimin took a few slow steps toward him. And you think I did? Jungkook hesitated. I think you didn't understand it. Jimin stopped just a foot away. 4 years ago, he repeated quietly, you almost quit. Jungkook froze. The memory hit him instantly. The endless schedules. The exhaustion. The night he had sat on the studio floor at 3 in the morning, staring at nothing, while everyone else had already gone home. You remember that? Jungkook asked. Of course, I remember. Jimin's voice softened. You thought nobody noticed how burned out you were. Jungkook looked down. I didn't want anyone to worry. Well, Jimin said gently, I did. The room fell silent again. I stayed with you that night, Jimin continued. Do you remember what you said? Jungkook shook his head. You told me you felt like a machine. Jungkook winced faintly. That sounds like something I'd say at 3 in the morning. You said you didn't know who you were anymore if you stopped performing. Jungkook's chest tightened. Jimin stepped even closer. And then you asked me something. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. What? You asked me who I thought you were. Jungkook remembered. Not the exact words, but the feeling, the desperation behind them. And do you remember what I said? Jimin asked. Jungkook shook his head again. You said a lot of things. Jimin smiled faintly. I told you you were annoying. Jungkook snorted. That sounds accurate. I told you you were stubborn. Also accurate. And then I told you something else. Jungkook's gaze lifted slowly. What? Jimin held his eyes. I told you that if you ever stopped performing, the only thing that would change is that I'd get more of your time. Jungkook blinked. I remember that. You laughed. Yeah. You thought I was joking. Jungkook frowned slightly. Were you? Jimin shook his head. No. Jungkook's heartbeat began to quicken. I stayed there with you until sunrise, Jimin continued, and when you finally fell asleep on the studio couch, I realized something. Jungkook whispered, what? Jimin's voice was calm. That your happiness mattered to me more than anything else in my life. Jungkook didn't breathe. And that scared me, Jimin said. Why? Because I realized I would choose you over everything if it ever came down to it. The words landed with a quiet intensity that made the room feel smaller. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. You're saying that's when you fell in love with me? Jimin shrugged lightly. Maybe. That's not an answer. It's the truth. Jungkook shook his head. You would have told me. Would I? Yes. Jimin laughed softly. You spent 8 years hiding your feelings in a wooden box, Jungkook. That was different. Was it? Yes. Why? Jungkook opened his mouth, then stopped. Jimin watched the realization slowly creep across his face. You were scared too, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin didn't deny it. I thought if I said something, Jimin admitted, I might lose the one person I couldn't live without. Jungkook stared at him. That's exactly what I thought. Jimin smiled faintly. Yeah, funny how that works. A heavy silence filled the room. 8 years of unsaid words hung between them like a storm finally breaking. Jungkook looked at the box on the bed. All those memories, he murmured. Yeah. I thought they only meant something to me. Jimin stepped closer until their shoulders almost touched. They meant something to me too. Jungkook's voice trembled slightly. Then why didn't you keep anything? Jimin glanced at the box. Because I didn't need objects to remember you. Jungkook's eyes lifted. What does that mean? Jimin's answer came softly. You were always right in front of me. Jungkook felt something in his chest crack open. You're serious, he whispered. Jimin nodded. I am. Jungkook laughed weakly, running a hand over his face. This is insane. A little. You're telling me we both spent years pretending nothing was there. Jimin shrugged. Apparently. Jungkook looked at him again. You're not messing with me. No. You're not just reacting to the box. No. You're not trying to make me feel better. Jimin stepped even closer until there was barely any space left between them. No. Jungkook searched his face one last time. And you're not going to wake up tomorrow and regret saying this. Jimin's eyes softened. No. For the first time since the box had been opened, Jungkook didn't look afraid. He looked stunned, like someone who had prepared for heartbreak for so long that happiness felt suspicious. You really are unbelievable, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin smiled. You said that already. Jungkook exhaled slowly. Then, after 8 years of silence, he said the one thing he had buried deeper than the box itself. I love you, Jimin. The words filled the room. Jimin didn't hesitate. I know, he replied gently. And for the first time, neither of them had to hide it. Jungkook expected the moment to feel triumphant. For 8 years, the words had lived behind his ribs like something sharp and fragile, something that could either free him or destroy everything if it ever escaped. Now they were finally out in the open, hanging in the quiet air of the apartment. I love you, Jimin. He had imagined dozens of reactions over the years: shock, awkward laughter, gentle rejection, silence. What he had never imagined was Jimin standing so close that their shoulders brushed, looking at him with an expression that was not surprised at all. I know. Jungkook let out a small, breathless laugh. You say that like you've known forever. Jimin shrugged lightly. Maybe I have. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Jungkook searched his face again, trying to find even the smallest sign of hesitation. But Jimin's gaze was steady, calm in a way that only made Jungkook more nervous. You're too calm, Jungkook muttered. What do you want me to do? I don't know, panic, yell something dramatic. Jimin laughed softly. You just confessed after 8 years, and you're disappointed I'm not screaming. I'm suspicious. Of what? Of how easy this looks for you. Jimin's smile faded slightly. It wasn't easy. Jungkook frowned. You look pretty relaxed for someone who just admitted they've been in love with their best friend for years. Jimin leaned back against the bed, folding his arms. That's because I already went through the messy part. What messy part? The part where you question everything. Jungkook sat on the edge of the chair across from him. When did that happen? Years ago. Seriously? Jimin nodded. Do you know how confusing it is to realize the person you rely on the most is also the person you want to see first every morning? Jungkook blinked. That sounds normal. No, it's not. It is if you love someone. That's the problem, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook's expression shifted. What do you mean? Jimin looked down at his hands. Because loving you was the one thing I couldn't risk. Jungkook frowned. Why? Jimin lifted his eyes again. Because you were already carrying so much. Jungkook's brow furrowed deeper. What does that have to do with it? You were younger than all of us when everything started. Everyone expected perfection from you: strength, talent, confidence. Jimin's voice softened. And I saw how much pressure you were under. Jungkook looked away slightly. That's not your responsibility. Maybe not, Jimin said, but I still cared. The room grew quiet again. Jungkook stared at the wooden box on the bed. So instead of saying anything, he murmured, you just kept it to yourself. Jimin smiled faintly. Looks like I wasn't the only one with secrets. Jungkook huffed. Yeah, but I had a literal evidence box. That was dramatic, by the way. You're welcome. Jimin chuckled, but the laughter faded quickly. Then he said something that made Jungkook's chest tighten again. But now we have a bigger problem. Jungkook looked up immediately. What problem? Jimin gestured between them. This. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. You mean the fact that we just confessed to each other? Exactly. That sounds like a good problem. Is it? Jungkook leaned forward slightly. Why wouldn't it be? Jimin hesitated. Because the world outside this apartment still exists. Jungkook knew what he meant instantly. The managers, the media, the fans, the endless scrutiny that followed them everywhere. We've handled pressure before, Jungkook said. Not like this. Why not? Because this is personal. Jungkook crossed his arms. Everything in our lives is personal. That's exactly why this is dangerous. Jungkook stared at him. You're already trying to back out. Jimin's head snapped up. I'm not backing out. That's what it sounds like. Jimin's voice sharpened. I'm being realistic. Realistic about what? About what happens if people find out. Jungkook laughed bitterly. You think I didn't think about that for 8 years? Jimin stood up again. And what was your conclusion? My conclusion, Jungkook said quietly, was that loving you was worth the risk. The words hit Jimin like a physical force. You say that so easily now. It was never easy. Then why say it? Because hiding it didn't make it disappear. Jimin paced slowly across the room. You think I don't know that? I think you're still afraid. Of course I'm afraid. Jungkook stood as well. Then say that instead of pretending the situation is impossible. Jimin stopped walking. I'm not pretending anything. Yes, you are. Jimin turned sharply. No, I'm thinking about consequences. And I'm thinking about reality. And what reality is that? Jungkook stepped closer, his voice dropping. That we've already wasted 8 years pretending nothing was there. Jimin's chest rose and fell. And you think we should just jump into something now? I think we should stop running. Jimin shook his head. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Then explain it to me. Jungkook didn't hesitate. We love each other. Jimin scoffed lightly. You say that like it solves everything. It solves the part that actually matters. Jimin's expression hardened. You're ignoring the rest. And you're hiding behind it. The tension between them sharpened. Jimin stepped closer until they were almost chest to chest. You think I'm hiding? Yes. You have no idea what I've been dealing with. Then tell me. Jimin opened his mouth. But no words came out. Jungkook watched him carefully. See, Jungkook said softly. Jimin looked frustrated. You're unbelievable. You said that earlier too. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. You think I'm scared of what people will say? Aren't you? Yes. Jungkook nodded. So am I. Jimin blinked. You are. Of course. You just said it was simple. It is. How can you say that if you're scared too? Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. Because fear doesn't change what's real. The words hung between them. Jimin felt something inside his chest twist painfully. You always do this, Jimin murmured. What? You make everything sound so clear. Jungkook shrugged. Maybe it is clear. Life isn't that simple. Jungkook stepped closer again. No, but this moment is. Jimin's heartbeat sped up. You're pushing me. Because you're hesitating. Because I'm thinking. Because you're afraid. Jimin's voice rose. Stop saying that like it's a weakness. Jungkook's response came instantly. It's not. Jimin froze. Then why do you keep pointing it out? Jungkook's voice softened. Because fear doesn't mean we should walk away. The anger in Jimin's chest wavered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jimin whispered something unexpected. What if we ruin the friendship? Jungkook stared at him. That's what you're worried about. Yes. Jungkook laughed quietly, shaking his head. That's ironic. How? Because we already ruined it. Jimin frowned. What do you mean? Jungkook gestured between them again. Friends don't spend 8 years secretly in love with each other. Jimin blinked. That's a good point. Exactly. Jimin sighed. This is a disaster. Jungkook smiled faintly. A beautiful disaster. Jimin rolled his eyes. You sound like a terrible romance movie. Maybe. But you're smiling. Because I'm relieved. Relieved. Yes. Why? Jungkook's voice dropped to a near whisper. Because for the first time in 8 years, I'm not the only one carrying this. Jimin felt his chest tighten again. You idiot, Jimin muttered softly. Probably. They stood there for several seconds, the tension between them shifting into something quieter but deeper. Jimin finally said, so what now? Jungkook raised an eyebrow. You ask that a lot. Because it's a big question. Jungkook thought for a moment. Then he said something that made Jimin's breath hitch. Now we stop pretending. Jimin looked at him carefully. And what does that look like? Jungkook stepped forward until the space between them disappeared completely. For years they had stood this close without thinking about it. Now every inch felt different. Like this, Jungkook said softly. Jimin's voice was barely audible. You're very confident suddenly. I'm terrified. You don't look terrified. That's because if I hesitate now, I'll overthink everything again. Jimin studied his face. You've really been waiting 8 years for this moment. Jungkook nodded once. Yeah. Jimin's heart pounded. You're serious about this? I've never been more serious about anything. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Jimin whispered, Jungkook. Jungkook didn't move away. Yes. Jimin hesitated. Then he said the one thing that finally shattered the last barrier between them. If we do this, we can't go back. Jungkook held his gaze without flinching. I don't want to go back. And for the first time since the box had been opened, Jimin realized that the future he had been afraid of for years was already standing right in front of him. The silence between them thickened until even breathing felt loud. Jimin could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the living room and the distant rumble of traffic below the apartment building. Ordinary sounds, the kind they had lived with for years, but now every noise felt like it belonged to a different world. Jungkook was still standing in front of him. Too close. Jimin had stood this close to him countless times before, during rehearsals, during late-night conversations, during moments when exhaustion made them lean on each other without thinking. But now the distance between them felt charged, every inch humming with something new. If we do this, we can't go back, Jimin had said. Jungkook's answer had come without hesitation. I don't want to go back. Jimin studied his face carefully. You say that now. I've been saying it in my head for 8 years. That's not the same thing. It feels the same to me. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're stubborn. You've said that before. Because it's true. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. Is that your way of saying yes? Jimin didn't answer. Instead, he stepped past Jungkook and walked toward the window again. Rain had started falling once more, a soft drizzle turning the city streets into mirrors of grey light. People moved below like shadows under umbrellas, unaware that inside this small apartment, two lives were quietly colliding. "You're thinking again," Jungkook said behind him. "Yes, that's dangerous." Jimin glanced over his shoulder. "You want me to stop thinking?" "For once." "Why?" "Because every time you start analyzing something, you talk yourself out of it." Jimin looked amused. "You sound very confident about that." "I've watched you do it for years." Jimin leaned against the window frame. "So what's your plan?" "My plan?" "Yes. You're the one pushing this forward. What happens next in Jungkook's master strategy?" Jungkook crossed his arms. "I didn't have a strategy." "Really?" "I had a box." Jimin laughed quietly. "That's the least romantic strategy I've ever heard." "It worked until you opened it." Jimin's expression softened slightly. "Yeah." Jungkook walked closer again, stopping a few steps away. "You're still hesitating." "Of course I am." "Why?" "Because once we cross this line, things change." Jungkook nodded slowly. "They already have." "That's different." "How?" "Because right now, it's just words." Jungkook's voice dropped. "You think this is just words?" Jimin met his gaze. "Isn't it?" Jungkook took another step forward. The space between them disappeared again. Jimin's pulse jumped. "You're doing that thing again," Jimin murmured. "What thing?" "Standing too close." "I've always stood this close." "Not like this." Jungkook smiled faintly. "You're the one who said we shouldn't pretend anymore." "That doesn't mean you should weaponize proximity." "Weaponize proximity," Jungkook laughed softly. "That's a new phrase." "You know exactly what you're doing." "Do I?" "Yes." Jungkook's voice lowered slightly. "Then maybe you should tell me." Jimin felt heat creep up the back of his neck. "You're trying to make me nervous." "Is it working?" "Maybe." "Good." Jimin rolled his eyes, but he didn't step away. "You're enjoying this." "A little." "You're unbelievable." "You've said that 3 times today." Jimin hesitated, then said quietly, "You're very brave all of a sudden." Jungkook shrugged. "I spent years being careful. And now I'm tired of pretending." Jimin watched him for a long moment. "You realize how reckless that sounds?" Jungkook shrugged again. "Maybe I am reckless." "That's not comforting." "Neither is living with regrets." Jimin sighed. "You always know exactly what to say." "That's because I've had 8 years to think about it." Jimin shook his head slightly, almost smiling. "You've rehearsed this." "A little." "That's terrifying." "Why?" "Because I haven't." Jungkook's voice softened. "You don't need to." "Easy for you to say." "Why?" "Because you've already decided." Jungkook tilted his head. "And you haven't." Jimin hesitated. Then he said something unexpected. "I decided years ago." Jungkook blinked. "Then what's the problem?" Jimin met his eyes. "The problem is that deciding something in your heart is very different from saying it out loud." Jungkook's chest tightened. "You already said it." "That was the easy part." "What's the hard part?" Jimin looked down briefly before answering. "Living with it." Jungkook studied him carefully. "You think loving me will ruin your life?" Jimin frowned. "That's not what I said." "It's what you're implying." "I'm saying it will complicate things." Jungkook stepped closer again. Everything about our lives is already complicated. Not like this. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Jungkook's expression darkened slightly. Let me ask you something. What? If I had never kept that box, if you had never discovered it, what would have happened? Jimin blinked. What do you mean? I mean, would we have stayed like this forever? Jimin didn't answer immediately. The thought made his chest ache. Maybe, he admitted quietly. Jungkook nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Jimin looked at him again. And what's wrong with that? Jungkook laughed softly. Everything. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Explain. Jungkook gestured toward the box, still sitting on the bed. Because that box would have kept getting heavier. Jimin followed his gaze. Memories don't weigh anything. They do if they're unsaid. Jimin's throat tightened slightly. You're very dramatic today. I've been dramatic for 8 years. Jimin smiled faintly. That's true. Jungkook's expression softened. Jimin. Yes. I need to know something. What? Jungkook hesitated. Then he asked the question that had lived in the back of his mind for years. If I kiss you right now, will you regret it? The words landed like a spark. Jimin's breath caught. You really went straight to that. I'm asking a serious question. Jimin studied him carefully. You're nervous. I'm terrified. You don't look terrified. I'm very good at pretending. Jimin felt his heart pounding. You always jump ahead. I've waited 8 years, I think I'm allowed. Jimin laughed softly. That's not how patience works. Too late. Jimin hesitated. Jungkook watched every small change in his expression. See, Jungkook murmured, you're thinking again. Because that's a big step. It's just a kiss. With you, nothing is just anything. Jungkook didn't deny it. That's fair. Jimin looked down for a moment, then back up. You really want to do this? Yes. You're sure? Yes. And you won't panic tomorrow? Jungkook shook his head. I've been panicking for 8 years already. Jimin laughed quietly at that. You're impossible. Probably. The room fell silent again. Then Jimin said something that made Jungkook's pulse spike. You know what's funny? What? If this had happened years ago, I would have run away by now. Jungkook's eyebrows lifted. Really? Definitely. What changed? Jimin looked at him steadily. You opened the box. Jungkook frowned slightly. How does that change anything? Jimin's voice softened. Because now I know how long you've been standing here. Jungkook's chest tightened. And it would be cruel to make you wait any longer. Jungkook stared at him. That's your reason. Jimin smiled faintly. No. Then what's the real reason? Jimin stepped closer until their foreheads almost touched. The real reason, he whispered, is that I've wanted to know what this feels like for years. Jungkook didn't move. Neither of them did. The world outside the apartment kept moving, cars passing, rain falling, people walking, but inside the room time seemed to slow to a fragile pause. Jungkook spoke quietly. You're sure? Jimin nodded once. Yes. Jungkook's voice dropped to a whisper. Then stop overthinking. And for the first time since the box had been opened, Jimin finally stopped thinking. For years, Jimin had imagined what this moment might feel like. He had imagined it during long nights on tour buses when everyone else had fallen asleep. He had imagined it in quiet rehearsal rooms when Jungkook laughed at something stupid, and the sound stayed in his chest longer than it should have. He had imagined it in those strange seconds when their eyes met across crowded rooms and neither of them looked away first. But imagination had always stopped there. In reality, the space between them had always been safe, familiar, defined by a word that kept everything contained. Friend. Now that word was dissolving. Jungkook was standing so close Jimin could feel the warmth of his breath. Their foreheads were almost touching, neither of them daring to move first. Then stop overthinking, Jungkook had whispered. For once, Jimin listened. He closed the distance. The kiss was not dramatic. There was no sudden rush, no sweeping movie moment where the world exploded into music and color. Instead, it was careful, almost hesitant, like both of them were stepping into unfamiliar territory while pretending they already knew the map. Jungkook froze for half a second when Jimin's lips touched his. 8 years of imagined scenarios shattered at once. Jimin was the first to pull back slightly, just enough to look at him. You stopped breathing, Jimin said softly. Jungkook blinked rapidly. I forgot how. Jimin laughed quietly. That's a terrible reaction. You kissed me, Jungkook replied. Yes. I've been thinking about that for 8 years. And reality is a little overwhelming. Jimin studied his expression carefully. You didn't hate it. Jungkook let out a breathless laugh. Hate it? Just checking. If I hated it, I'd have run out the door by now. Jimin smiled faintly. That's true. But Jungkook hadn't moved. In fact, he looked more unsettled now than before the kiss. You're thinking again, Jimin said. I can't help it. What are you thinking? Jungkook hesitated. Then he said something unexpected. I'm thinking about how dangerous this is. Jimin raised an eyebrow. You weren't worried about that 5 minutes ago. I was distracted. By what? You. Jimin chuckled. That's convenient. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. I mean it. Jimin leaned back against the desk, watching him. You regret it already. Jungkook's head snapped up. No. Then what's the problem? Jungkook's voice dropped slightly. The problem is that I liked it too much. Jimin's heartbeat skipped. That's not exactly a problem. It is if I lose control of the situation. Jimin tilted his head. You've been controlling the situation for 8 years. Maybe it's time you stopped. Jungkook gave him a skeptical look. That sounds suspiciously like something someone says before chaos. Maybe chaos is overdue. Jungkook stared at him for a long moment. You're acting very calm for someone who just crossed a line we've both been avoiding for nearly a decade. Jimin shrugged lightly. I told you, I already went through the panic phase years ago. That's not fair. Why? Because now I'm the one panicking. Jimin smiled. Good. Jungkook blinked. Good. Yes. Why is that good? Because for once you're the one catching up. Jungkook crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes. You're enjoying this way too much. Maybe. You're evil. Probably. The tension between them shifted again, softer now but still electric. Jungkook looked toward the bed, where the wooden box still sat quietly. All those memories, he murmured. Yeah. I thought they were one-sided. Jimin followed his gaze. They were. Jungkook walked over and picked up the box. It looked smaller in his hands now. I collected proof, Jungkook said quietly. Proof of what? That every moment with you meant something. Jimin leaned against the wall. And now, Jungkook opened the lid again, glancing at the scattered objects inside. Now I'm realizing something strange. What? Jungkook looked back at him. You were there for every single one of these memories. Of course I was. But you didn't need the objects. Jimin shook his head. No. Why? Jimin's voice softened. Because you were never just a memory to me. Jungkook's chest tightened again. Before he could respond, his phone suddenly buzzed loudly on the desk. The sound shattered the fragile quiet in the room. Jungkook glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. Jimin noticed. What is it? Jungkook didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the phone like it was a ticking bomb. Jungkook. Jungkook picked it up slowly. It's the manager. Jimin frowned. That's normal. Not at this time. What time is it? Jungkook checked the screen again. 7 in the morning. Jimin blinked. Okay, that's weird. The phone buzzed again. Jungkook answered. Hello. Jimin watched his face carefully as he listened. At first, Jungkook looked confused, then surprised, then suddenly tense. What? Jungkook said sharply. Jimin straightened. Jungkook turned away slightly, packing across the room. No, that's impossible, Jungkook said into the phone. Jimin's stomach tightened. What happened? Jimin mouthed silently. Jungkook held up a finger, still listening. Where did it come from? Jungkook asked. There was a long pause. Jimin's chest began to pound. Jungkook's expression darkened. You're sure? He said quietly. Another pause. Then Jungkook ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Okay, we'll come in. He ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavy. Jimin stepped closer. What happened? Jungkook looked at him with a strange expression. A problem. Jimin sighed. You're going to need to be more specific. Jungkook hesitated. Then he said something that made Jimin's stomach drop. A photo leaked. Jimin blinked. A photo of what? Jungkook hesitated again. Of us. Jimin felt a chill run down his spine. Us how? Jungkook exhaled slowly. From last night. Jimin's mind raced. We didn't go anywhere last night. Jungkook's voice was tense. Not last night. Jimin frowned. Then what? Jungkook met his eyes. The rooftop. Jimin froze. The Polaroid. The moment from years ago. That photo, Jimin said slowly. Jungkook nodded. Jimin's heart began to hammer. How could that leak? Jungkook's voice was tight. I don't know. Jimin paced across the room. Is it bad? Jungkook hesitated. Define bad. Jimin stopped walking. Jungkook. The angle makes it look like we're closer than we actually were. Jimin stared at him. We were sitting next to each other. Yes. So how does that look suspicious? Jungkook showed him the phone screen. Jimin leaned closer. The image was blurry, clearly taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable. Two figures on a rooftop. One of them laughing. The other looking at him like the rest of the world didn't exist. Jimin's breath caught. Wow, he whispered. Jungkook rubbed his temple. Yeah. Jimin glanced at him. That's how you looked at me. Jungkook groaned. Now is not the time for that. Jimin looked at the photo again. It does look intense. That's the problem. Jimin handed the phone back. So what's the situation? Jungkook sighed. Someone posted it online. And people are already speculating. Jimin crossed his arms. Speculating about what? Jungkook gave him a look. You know exactly what. Jimin felt a strange mix of dread and disbelief. All this because of a 7-year-old photo. Jungkook nodded. The internet doesn't care about timelines. Jimin paced again. So what does the manager want? He wants us at the office immediately. Jimin stopped. Of course he does. Jungkook watched him carefully. You're quiet. I'm thinking. That's never good. Jimin glanced back at the phone. That photo, it's real. Yes. It's not staged. No. And the way you're looking at me in it. Jungkook groaned again. Please don't say it. Is exactly the way you look at me now. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. This is a disaster. Jimin exhaled slowly. No. Jungkook opened his eyes. No. Jimin looked at him. This is the moment we were both afraid of for years. Jungkook's voice dropped. And Jimin met his gaze. And it finally happened. The room fell silent again. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly against the windows. Inside the apartment, two lives that had just begun to change were about to collide with the world that had always been waiting outside. The car ride to the office was quieter than either of them expected. Jimin sat in the passenger seat while Jungkook drove, both of them staring ahead at the wet streets sliding past under grey morning light. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with a steady rhythm, like a clock counting down. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. Jimin could feel the tension in Jungkook's hands on the steering wheel. His knuckles were pale, gripped too tight. You're going to break the wheel if you keep doing that, Jimin said finally. Jungkook didn't look away from the road. I'm fine. You're not fine. I've been worse. That's not comforting. Jungkook exhaled slowly. I just don't understand how that photo surfaced now. Jimin leaned back in his seat. 7 years is a long time. Someone probably found it buried in a hard drive somewhere. That's not how leaks usually happen. You think someone planned it. Jungkook hesitated. I don't know. Jimin glanced sideways at him. You're thinking too much again. That's ironic coming from you. Jimin shrugged. I learned from the best. Jungkook didn't smile. Jimin noticed. Hey, he said quietly. What? Look at me for a second. Jungkook kept his eyes on the road. I'm driving. You can glance. Jungkook finally turned his head briefly. Jimin's expression was calm, almost annoyingly so. Why do you look like you're going to a funeral? Jimin asked. Because this could be bad. Or it could be nothing. You don't believe that. No, Jimin admitted. Jungkook huffed quietly. Exactly. The car stopped at a red light. Rain tapped softly on the roof. Jimin stared out the window for a moment before speaking again. You know what's funny? What? If this had happened yesterday before the box. Jungkook finished the sentence for him. You would have panicked. Completely. And now. Jimin turned to him. Now I'm mostly annoyed. Annoyed? Yes. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Why? Because we spent 8 years worrying about this exact scenario. And now it's happening. Exactly. Jungkook frowned slightly. That doesn't sound like a reason to be calm. It kind of is. How? Jimin shrugged. Because the worst thing already happened. Jungkook looked at him again. The worst thing. You told me you loved me. Jungkook's mouth fell open slightly. That's the worst thing. I'm joking. You're terrible. You survived. The light turned green. Jungkook pressed the gas again. But Jimin noticed the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. Besides, Jimin continued, the photo isn't even recent. That doesn't matter. It matters a little. Not to the internet. Jimin sighed. True. They drove in silence again for several minutes. Then Jungkook suddenly spoke. What if they ask us to deny it? Jimin didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air like something fragile. What do you mean? Jimin said finally. You know what I mean. Jimin crossed his arms. You mean deny that we're involved? Yes. Jimin stared out the windshield. Technically, we just kissed. That counts. Barely. Jungkook's voice tightened. It counts to me. Jimin looked at him. I didn't say it didn't. Then what are you saying? I'm saying we don't even know what they'll ask yet. Jungkook's jaw clenched. They'll want damage control. Probably. And damage control usually means lying. Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook glanced at him again. You're quiet. I'm thinking. That's dangerous. Jimin almost smiled. You've said that before. Because it's true. Jimin took a slow breath. If they ask us to deny it, we'll deal with it. That's not an answer. It's the only one we have right now. Jungkook didn't push further. But the tension returned to his hands. They pulled into the company parking lot 15 minutes later. The building towered above them, glass walls reflecting the dull sky. Jungkook turned off the engine. Neither of them moved. Jimin looked at the building. Feels like walking into a courtroom. Pretty much. You think they're angry? Yes. Jimin sighed. Great. Jungkook leaned back in his seat. Jimin. Yes. If they ask you to say something. Jimin looked at him. Say what? That we're just friends. The word hung between them. Friends. The label they had used for years. The label that had just shattered hours earlier. Jimin studied Jungkook's face carefully. You're worried about me. I'm worried about you getting dragged into something messy. Jimin's voice softened. You're the one who's been carrying this longer. That doesn't matter. It does. Jungkook shook his head. Jimin. No. Jungkook frowned. What do you mean no? I mean don't start sacrificing yourself already. I'm not. You are. Jungkook looked frustrated. I'm trying to protect you. You've been doing that for 8 years. And maybe it's my turn. Jungkook blinked. Your turn to what? To protect us. The words hit harder than Jimin expected. Jungkook stared at him. You're serious? Yes. Jungkook laughed weakly. You kissed me 10 minutes ago, and now you're declaring war on the industry. I didn't say war. That's what it sounds like. Jimin shrugged. Maybe a small battle. Jungkook rubbed his face. You're unbelievable. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Jimin opened the car door. Come on. Jungkook grabbed his wrist before he could step out. Jimin looked down at his hand. Jungkook's grip was firm but not aggressive. Jimin. Yes. You don't have to do this. Do what? Stand your ground. Jimin smiled faintly. You think I can't handle it? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Jungkook hesitated. Then he admitted quietly, I'm saying I don't want you to get hurt because of me. Jimin's expression softened. You idiot. Jungkook sighed. You've said that before too. Jimin squeezed his hand briefly before pulling away. Let's go. They walked into the building together. The lobby was unusually tense. Staff members moved quickly, whispering to each other, glancing at their phones. Jimin noticed several people look up when they entered. Yep, Jimin muttered under his breath, this is bad. Jungkook kept walking. Their manager was waiting near the elevator. His expression alone told them everything. You too, he said sharply, office now. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Good morning to you too. Not today, Jimin. They followed him down the hallway. The door to the conference room shut behind them with a heavy click. Several executives were already seated around the table. Phones and tablets covered the surface. The large screen on the wall showed a familiar image. The rooftop photo. Jimin exhaled quietly. Wow, he murmured. Jungkook stood stiff beside him. The manager turned toward them. Do you understand what kind of situation this is? Jungkook nodded. Yes. Good, the manager said, because this is spreading fast. One of the executives spoke. Fans are already analyzing the body language. Jimin muttered under his breath, of course they are. Another executive looked at them seriously. We need a clear statement immediately. Jungkook's shoulders tensed. What kind of statement? The manager didn't hesitate. You'll say the same thing you've always said. The room fell silent. Jimin already knew what was coming. The manager continued. You'll say you're just close friends. The words echoed in the room like a verdict. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Jimin felt the tension surge again between them. The manager looked directly at them. We release the statement today. No one spoke. The executives waited. The manager folded his arms. Well, he said, is there a problem? Jimin slowly glanced sideways at Jungkook. Then he looked back at the screen. The photo showed Jungkook staring at him like nothing else existed. 7 years ago. A moment that had never been meant for the world. The manager's voice cut through the silence again. Jungkook, Jimin. Jimin finally spoke. His voice was calm. Yes. Everyone looked at him. We understand the situation. The manager nodded. Good. Jimin continued. But there's something you should understand too. The room went completely still. Jungkook turned toward him slowly. The manager frowned. And what is that? Jimin met his gaze without hesitation. That photo isn't wrong. The room went silent so quickly it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. That photo isn't wrong. Jimin's voice had been calm when he said it, almost casual, but the words landed like a shockwave across the conference table. For a second, nobody reacted. Then their manager's chair scraped sharply against the floor as he leaned forward. What did you just say? Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned toward Jimin slowly, his expression somewhere between disbelief and alarm. Jimin. But Jimin didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the manager. I said the photo isn't wrong. The manager's face darkened. That is not the answer we discussed. Jimin shrugged lightly. We didn't discuss anything yet. One of the executives cleared his throat. Let's slow down for a moment. Jimin glanced at the screen again. The photo was still there, blurry, grainy, taken from a distance, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. Jungkook looking at him like the world had disappeared. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're asking us to say we're just friends, he said. Yes, the manager replied sharply, because that is the only responsible statement right now. Jungkook finally found his voice. Maybe we should. Jimin cut him off gently. Wait. Jungkook looked at him. The look in Jimin's eyes stopped him from finishing the sentence. It wasn't reckless. It was steady. Jimin turned back to the table. You want us to say the photo means nothing, Jimin continued. Yes, but that would be a lie. The manager's palm hit the table. We are not having a philosophical discussion about honesty right now. Jimin didn't flinch. We kind of are. One of the executives leaned forward. Jimin, we understand you're under pressure. I'm not under pressure. You clearly are. No, Jimin said calmly, I'm just tired of pretending. Jungkook felt a sharp pulse of panic. Jimin. But Jimin still didn't look at him. The manager's voice grew colder. Do you understand the implications of what you're saying? Yes. This could damage everything. Maybe. Maybe, the manager repeated. Jimin finally turned slightly toward Jungkook. You said the worst thing already happened, he murmured quietly. Jungkook stared at him. Yeah. And we survived. Jungkook exhaled slowly. The room was watching them now. Every pair of eyes focused on the silent exchange between them. The manager looked furious. This is not a personal conversation between the two of you, he snapped. Jimin faced him again. You're right. Then act like it. Jimin folded his arms. You want a clean denial. Yes. And if we refuse? The manager's eyes hardened. Then we have a much bigger problem. The tension in the room thickened. Jungkook felt the weight of every gaze pressing against him. One of the executives spoke carefully. Let's be clear about something. Rumors are already spreading online. If you don't deny them immediately, speculation will explode. Jimin nodded. That's how the internet works. Exactly. So the solution is to lie. It's called damage control. Jimin smiled faintly. That's a nicer phrase. The manager leaned forward again. This is not a joke. I'm not joking. Then start acting like a professional. Jimin's eyes sharpened slightly. I am acting like a professional. Professionals protect the company. And the company protects us, Jimin replied calmly. A quiet murmur moved across the room. Jungkook could feel the tension spiraling. He stepped forward slightly. Maybe we should take a minute. But the manager cut him off. Jungkook. Jungkook stopped. You're the one in the photo looking at him like that, the manager said. Jungkook's chest tightened. You're the one people are analyzing frame by frame right now. Jungkook didn't respond. So tell me something, the manager continued. Is there any truth behind what people are saying? The room went completely still again. Jungkook felt every muscle in his body tense. He glanced at Jimin. Jimin met his eyes. No pressure. No expectation. Just quiet trust. Jungkook looked back at the table. What exactly are people saying? He asked. The manager scoffed. Don't play dumb. I'm asking a question. One of the executives slid a tablet across the table. Jungkook looked down. The screen showed dozens of posts. Fans analyzing the photo. Comments about body language. Speculation about hidden relationships. The words blurred together. Jungkook exhaled slowly and set the tablet down. So the rumor is that we're more than friends. Yes. And you want us to deny it? Yes. Jungkook nodded. Okay. Jimin turned his head slightly toward him. Jungkook noticed the movement. For a moment, the room disappeared again. Just the two of them. You don't have to, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook smiled faintly. I know. Jimin watched him carefully. What are you doing? He asked under his breath. Jungkook leaned slightly closer. Trusting you. Jimin's chest tightened. Jungkook straightened and looked back at the table. You want the truth, Jungkook said. The manager crossed his arms. Yes. Jungkook took a breath. The truth is that photo is real. We know that, the manager snapped. And the way I'm looking at him in that photo. Jungkook glanced at Jimin again. Is exactly how I felt. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. What are you saying? Jungkook. This is not acceptable. The manager slammed his hand on the table again. Enough. Silence fell again. The manager stared at them like they had just detonated something in the middle of the room. You're both out of your minds. Jimin spoke quietly. Probably. This could destroy your careers. Jungkook shrugged slightly. Or it could just change them. That is not your decision to make. Jimin tilted his head. Whose decision is it? The manager glared at him. You signed contracts. Yes. You represent an entire brand. I know. Then start acting like it. Jimin's voice remained calm. I've represented this company for years. And now you're throwing that away. I'm not throwing anything away. The manager leaned forward. Then what exactly are you doing? Jimin looked at Jungkook for a brief moment. Then he answered, I'm telling the truth. The manager laughed bitterly. Truth doesn't matter in a situation like this. Jungkook spoke quietly. Maybe it should. Every executive at the table turned toward him. The manager's voice dropped dangerously low. Do you realize how big this could become? Jungkook nodded. Yes. You could lose endorsements, sponsors, opportunities. Maybe. And you're willing to risk that. Jungkook hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he looked at Jimin. Jimin was watching him with an expression Jungkook had never seen before. Not fear. Not hesitation. Something stronger. Jungkook turned back to the table. Yes, he said simply. The room went silent again. The manager stared at them both in disbelief. You're serious? Neither of them answered. Because the answer was obvious. The manager leaned back slowly in his chair. You two have no idea what you've just started. Jimin's voice was steady. Maybe. The manager's eyes were sharp now. Once this gets out, you won't be able to control what happens next. Jungkook nodded. I know. And you're still doing it. Jimin glanced once more at the photo on the screen. Jungkook looking at him like nothing else existed. Then Jimin said quietly, We already did. For several seconds after Jimin said it, nobody in the conference room spoke. We already did. The sentence hung in the air like the final note of a song that no one was ready to hear. The manager leaned back slowly in his chair, staring at them with a mixture of disbelief and anger. You already did, he repeated quietly. Jungkook could feel the tension vibrating through the room. The executives around the table exchanged glances, some shocked, some calculating, all of them realizing the situation had just shifted into something far more complicated than a simple rumor. Yes, Jimin said calmly. The manager rubbed his temple as if trying to physically push the problem out of existence. So let me get this straight, he said. You two are standing here in this room during a crisis meeting about a leaked photo that is already causing speculation online, and instead of denying it, you're confirming it. Jimin tilted his head slightly. We are not confirming anything specific. The manager stared at him. That might be the most infuriating sentence you've said today. Jungkook almost smiled despite the tension. One of the executives leaned forward. We need clarity, she said. Right now the situation is ambiguous. If you leave it that way, the narrative will spiral out of control. Jungkook looked at her. The narrative already spiraled. That doesn't mean we give up control. Jimin spoke quietly. You're asking us to pretend something doesn't exist. Yes, and if we can't? The executive hesitated. Then we need a strategy. The manager slammed his folder shut. No, what we need is discipline. Jungkook finally spoke again. With respect, we've been disciplined for years. That's exactly why this is unacceptable. Jimin folded his arms. Because we stopped pretending. The manager looked like he was about to explode. Because you are risking everything that has been built around you. Jimin's voice remained calm. You mean the image? Yes. The illusion. It's not an illusion, the manager snapped. It's branding. Jimin's expression didn't change. That's a nicer word for it. Jungkook shifted slightly beside him. He could feel the room turning colder with every sentence. One of the executives spoke carefully. This isn't just about image, it's about stability. Fans invest emotionally in what they believe you represent. Jimin nodded slowly. And what exactly do they believe we represent? Friendship, brotherhood, loyalty. Jimin's voice softened. None of that disappears. The manager scoffed. You're being naive. Maybe. You think people will just accept this? Jimin shrugged slightly. Some will, some won't. And you're comfortable with that? Jimin looked at Jungkook briefly. Yes. Jungkook felt a strange warmth in his chest despite the tension. The manager noticed the glance. That right there, he said sharply, pointing between them, that is exactly the problem. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Because we looked at each other. Because you're not thinking about consequences. Jungkook's voice grew firmer. We are thinking about them. Then why are you ignoring them? Jungkook paused. Then he answered quietly. Because consequences aren't the same as mistakes. The room went silent again. Jimin looked at him with a small, surprised smile. One of the executives spoke again. There's another issue. Everyone turned toward her. The internet is already digging through old content. Jungkook frowned. What do you mean? She tapped the tablet. Clips, interviews, moments between you two, people are analyzing everything. Jimin sighed. Of course they are. The executive continued. They're building timelines. Jungkook felt a chill crawl up his spine. Timelines? Yes. Jimin laughed quietly. Detective work. This is serious, the manager snapped. I know. You're treating it like a joke. I'm treating it like reality. The manager glared at him. And what reality is that? Jimin looked at the screen again. That people noticed something before we ever said anything. Jungkook's chest tightened. One of the executives turned the tablet toward them. Look. Jungkook leaned closer. The screen showed a compilation video someone had already uploaded. Old clips. Years of interactions. Glances. Touches. Moments that had once seemed harmless. Now they looked different. Jungkook exhaled slowly. That's impressive. Jimin snorted. They missed a few. The manager looked like he might actually lose his mind. This is not funny. Jimin looked up. I know. Then stop acting like it is. Jimin's voice lowered slightly. I'm not laughing at the situation. Then what are you laughing at? At the fact that we spent years trying to hide something people were already noticing. The room fell quiet again. The executive spoke softly. He has a point. The manager turned toward her sharply. You're not helping. I'm being realistic. Jungkook looked at the video again. Clips of them laughing. Standing too close. Looking at each other for a second too long. Moments that once felt private now dissected frame by frame. Wow, Jungkook murmured. Jimin leaned closer. What? They even found that concert backstage moment. Jimin groaned. Oh no. The manager rubbed his forehead. I don't even want to know. One of the executives asked carefully what happened backstage. Jimin waved his hand dismissively. Nothing dramatic. Jungkook smirked slightly. You almost kissed me. The room froze. Jimin immediately elbowed him. Why would you say that out loud? Jungkook shrugged. They're already analyzing everything. The manager stared at them like they were aliens. You're both unbelievable. Jimin nodded. We've heard that today. The executive spoke again. This is exactly why we need a controlled statement. Jungkook sighed. And the statement is still the same. Yes. We're just friends. Yes. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Jimin looked back at him. 8 years of silence had been easier than this moment. Because silence didn't force a choice. The manager leaned forward. This is your last opportunity to handle this cleanly. Jungkook felt the weight of the room pressing down on him. Cleanly, he repeated. Yes. Meaning quietly. Yes. And if we do? The manager's eyes hardened. Then the consequences will be severe. Jimin spoke softly. Define severe. Public backlash, contract complications, sponsors pulling out. Jungkook swallowed. That's a lot. Yes. And you're still asking the same thing. Yes. Jungkook looked at Jimin again. Jimin's expression was calm, but his eyes were searching. Asking without speaking. Are you sure? Jungkook took a slow breath. Then he turned back to the table. I can't say it. The manager blinked. What? I can't say we're just friends. The words landed heavily in the room. The manager's voice dropped dangerously low. You are refusing a direct request from this company. Jungkook nodded. Yes. The manager looked at Jimin. And you? Jimin didn't hesitate. Same answer. The silence that followed was deeper than anything before. The executives looked stunned. The manager leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time since the meeting began, he didn't look angry. He looked tired. You have no idea what what kind of storm you've just invited, he said quietly. Jimin met his gaze. Maybe. The manager's eyes moved between them. And when that storm hits, you won't be able to stop it. Jungkook answered softly. We're not trying to stop it. The manager shook his head slowly. You two are either incredibly brave. He paused. Or incredibly reckless. Jimin gave a faint smile. Probably both. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the office buzzed with quiet tension. Phones rang. Staff members whispered. And somewhere out there, beyond the building and the rain-soaked streets, the world was already beginning to react to a story that was no longer just a rumor. Rain continued to fall against the tall glass windows of the conference room, turning the city outside into a blurred painting of gray lights and moving shadows. Inside, the air felt heavy, like the room itself understood that something irreversible had just happened. No one spoke for a long time. The manager sat with his hands folded on the table, staring at Jungkook and Jimin with the exhausted expression of someone who had just realized that control had quietly slipped out of his hands. You understand, he said slowly, that from this moment forward, nothing will be simple again. Jimin nodded. I know. You'll be questioned constantly. I expected that. Your words will be dissected. That's already happening. The manager's gaze shifted to Jungkook. And you? Jungkook's voice was steady. I've lived under a microscope for years. I'll survive. The manager exhaled through his nose, leaning back again. You both speak like this is some philosophical decision about honesty. Jimin shook his head gently. It's not philosophical. Then what is it? Jimin glanced at Jungkook for a brief second before answering. It's just reality. One of the executives quietly closed the tablet that had been showing the flood of online speculation. The situation will continue to escalate, she said, whether you deny it or not. Jungkook nodded. We know. She studied them carefully. Then you're prepared for whatever comes next. Jimin answered simply. Yes. The manager stood up slowly. For a moment, it looked like he might argue again, but instead, he only shook his head. I've worked in this industry a long time, he said. I've seen careers collapse over far less than this. Jimin didn't look away. I know. The manager walked toward the door, then paused. But I've also seen something else, he added quietly. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. What's that? People who refused to live as someone they were. The manager looked at them both again. Sometimes that kind of honesty costs everything. The room fell silent. Then Jimin said softly, sometimes pretending costs more. The manager didn't respond. He simply opened the door and walked out, leaving the executives behind in a room that felt suddenly much larger than before. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then one of the executives cleared her throat. We'll prepare a neutral statement, she said, something that acknowledges the photo but avoids direct confirmation. Jungkook nodded. Thank you. Another executive gathered his papers. This situation will take time to settle. Jimin shrugged lightly. Most storms do. Gradually, the room emptied. Chairs slid back, papers were collected. The screen displaying the rooftop photo finally went dark. Soon only Jungkook and Jimin remained. The quiet that settled between them was very different from the silence earlier that morning. This one felt calmer. Jungkook leaned against the table and ran a hand through his hair. Well, he muttered. Jimin tilted his head. Well, what? That escalated quickly. Jimin laughed under his breath. You think? Jungkook looked at him. You didn't hesitate at all. Jimin shrugged. I spent years hesitating. And now I'm tired of it. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Are you scared? Jimin thought about the question. Then he answered honestly. Yes. Jungkook nodded. Me too. They stood there quietly for a moment. Outside the window, the rain was finally starting to slow. The grey clouds were thinning, allowing a faint strip of pale sunlight to break through the skyline. Jungkook noticed it first. Look! Jimin followed his gaze. The city below looked washed clean after the storm. Cars moved again, people hurried across sidewalks. Life continued exactly as it always had. Strangely normal. Jungkook exhaled slowly. You know what's funny? What? For years, I thought the moment everything came out would feel like the end of something. Jimin glanced at him. And Jungkook smiled faintly. It doesn't. Jimin leaned his shoulder lightly against Jungkook. No, he agreed, it doesn't. They stood like that for a moment, watching the light spread slowly across the city. Jungkook spoke again. You realize the internet is probably exploding right now. Definitely. People will analyze every second of this. Of course they will. Jungkook laughed softly. 8 years of secrets, and now everything happens in one day. Jimin smiled. That's how life works sometimes. Jungkook turned slightly toward him. So what happens now? Jimin looked out at the skyline again. Then he said something simple. Now we live. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. That's it. That's it. Jungkook considered that for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. They walked out of the conference room together and down the long hallway toward the exit. Some staff members glanced at them with curiosity, others pretended not to look at all. But neither of them stopped. When they finally stepped outside, the rain had completely stopped. Cool air drifted through the street, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and fresh wind. The world looked the same as it always had. But something inside them had shifted. Jungkook glanced sideways at Jimin. You know something. What? That box. Jimin smiled faintly. The memory box. Yeah. Jungkook chuckled. I kept it hidden for years because I thought those memories were too dangerous to say out loud. Jimin nudged his shoulder lightly. And now, Jungkook looked ahead at the open street. Now I realize they were never meant to stay in a box. Jimin nodded quietly. Some memories were never meant to be hidden. Some truths waited patiently for the moment they could finally breathe. And sometimes, when the box was finally opened, what came out wasn't destruction. It was simply the beginning of something honest.